I'm delighted to be joined on stage by Cabinet Secretary Mairi Gougeon, Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and the Islands. Before she comes on today, I'm just going to give a sort of overview of some of the strategic work that's going on in Scotland to develop agritourism, and I'm also going to give you some insights into the international agritourism, sort of what's going on internationally, and also the Vermont conference, which I was very fortunate to attend with 6 others that are in this room today. So agritourism, it is a long-term strategy that we're on, and I think at the moment, having come out of 2 years of COVID, and then we're still affected by COVID, we also, it is a wee bit doom and gloom at the moment. Economic challenges, various other things going on, but I want you to stay positive and to think about the long term here. Other countries that have really been established for 20, 30 years with a proper sort of public sector, private sector partnership in agritourism, they've been going at it for a long time with this kind of working together vision and the investment that's gone into the sector. So we have to think about the long-term goals. And ultimately, what keeps me entirely motivated is that in many other countries, agritourism income is 4, 5, 6, 7 times bigger than it is in Scotland at the moment, pro rata. So that's what we've got to work towards. Italy has 25,000 farms in agritourism. I have to say they have many more farms than us, but they have 25,000. And those 25,000 on average could be relatively small numbers of hectares of land, but really generating 200,000, 300,000 euros for that family. So there's huge potential for this sector in Scotland. And it's great. We've finally got to this stage where the private sector are all aligned. There's so many entrepreneurial, amazing farmers. We heard from 3 this morning. We've got another 3 this afternoon. We've got another 3 tomorrow. But there's so many more people out there. But also, at last, the public sector, all the agencies, government, everybody is aligned behind what we're doing. And so our Scottish agritourism strategy, really, we want to have 1,000 farms and crofts in Scotland in agritourism by 2030. And at the moment, our official figures are 531. And how we're measuring that is the people who have a listing on visitscotland.com. And you might wonder, well, that's a bit, why are you using that as a measure? Because if you have your listing, which is free, entirely free, and you have your listing there, Visit Scotland are verifying you're a real working farm, and then we can actually verify that you're in existence because you've got a public facing. So we've got 531 that we know about. We know there's about probably 200 more out there, but people haven't got their listing up. So please, if you haven't got a listing with visitscotland.com, they're here in the foyer. Go and find them and they'll support you. And we could be, well on our way to the 1,000 just by people getting their listing done. We know we're probably not at that 1,000 mark, but we're heading towards that by 2030. We also want, in our strategy, we have 50% of farms and crofts to be offering their own produce as part of a visit to a farm. So either as farm retail that they take home, or something delicious to eat after a farm tour, or arriving for a farm stay and your fridge is stocked with delicious produce from that farm. And that is because what differentiates us from all other types of rural tourism is that we're all farmers and crofters. We're all producing food, and that's our core function, and then that's what we can differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. The definition, we defined agritourism ourselves 2 years ago. A definition internationally doesn't exist, and working with our leaders and working with Visit Scotland and the enterprise agencies, we set our definition. And I'll come on to, when I talk about the international work, why this is so important. So I said before, real working farm, croft or estate which produces food. The international community are now looking at this definition because there isn't one and wondering if they'll adopt this one that we've come up with as the international definition of agritourism. And there's debate at the moment because a lot of people in the international community, wool and fibre from alpacas and sheep and other things like that are as important as food. So that's why I've put what about fibre. So agritourism in Scotland, everybody knows this, it's sitting in this room, but we're looking at selling farm food and drink direct, and that bit of it goes into the farm retail figures. So when you see the growth tracker results, that's why farm retail sits within the food and drink and agricultural budget at national level, and everything else on the right there goes into tourism, the way that it's measured. But really to the consumer doesn't really see that split. Most of our farm shops have a farm cafe or have accommodation or do other things. So there's lots of people that are coming to a farm, having some sort of activity and then going to the farm shop as part of that. And they see, although the farm shop plays a vital role in providing food for local communities, it's also a leisure activity and a great day out for visitors. The growth tracker has been released yesterday. I'd like to thank Visit Scotland, especially Raymond and Zainab and Lorna for their work in helping with this growth tracker. There's a lot of work goes into the questions, the promotion of it, all the data, and I'd like to thank everybody here that took part and gave us their time. It's not a quick couple of hours, you've got to have all your stats ready. You had a lot of nagging from a lot of us to get the information in, but it's so vital that we have this information so we can measure how our sector is performing in future years. But I just want to share a few things with you from the growth tracker. But one is, this was from the first COVID year. So this is from April 2020, where we went just into lockdown for the following 12 months. And even with most of us being closed for a huge chunk of that, it's just the profitability. It's really sad that agriculture on its own, that farming can't make more profit than it does. And, we're trying to, we need to be in a position where we have more margin for doing what we do as farmers. However, if agritourism can help us sustain our farming businesses, you can see the profitability here from some of the activities, which really does make a difference. And we saw that this morning. It allows multiple generations to have an income. The Agricultural Bill consultation, hands up who replied and put their consultation in. Oh, I was hoping there'd be loads of people. There's a few. So thank you to everybody who has taken the time to reply to the Agricultural Bill consultation, which closed yesterday. We put this is not all of our, don't worry, I've not got a slide on the whole of our response, but this is part of our response. But basically, what we're arguing for is that in other countries where agritourism has been very successful, agritourism is considered to be an agricultural activity because it is the marketing and sales arm of agriculture. So they're using agritourism to sell agriculture and food and drink. And so we feel it is not a diversification as such, it's not doing something different from being a farmer, it is an extension of being a farmer. And we would like provision made in the new agricultural bill that agritourism could be considered as an agricultural activity. I'm delighted as well that National Farmers Union of Scotland have also put a submission in which supports agritourism, and that is a huge significant step for us, so that's gone in too. Currently we have a number of barriers to growth, and hopefully it's something we can discuss with the Cabinet Secretary in the questions coming up as well. I'll not go through all of these, but I think a number of people here have a number of issues with planning, taking too long, not enough resource in planning areas, people that don't really understand agritourism, and inconsistencies between council areas and within council areas. We also have new planning legislation coming forward, and I'm a wee bit concerned about the impact that that might have on agritourism. just with the flexibility to use buildings, cottages, etc. on farms for agritourism. Short-term lets are having a huge impact on us in terms of there's a lot of stress around this. There's a lot of work to be done with short-term lets, and then there's the cost of the legislation. And we know, because we're all in a WhatsApp group where we share everything, what's going on in different regions. So some people are paying £200, some people are paying £1,500, some people are paying £3,000 for the same size of properties. So we have no way out of this, but I would like to just make it clear that it will have some sort of detrimental effect on the ability for agritourism to grow. And it's important that the government understand the unintended consequences, because there's no point having a growth strategy if you've got these other things that are going to impact us. The deposit return scheme will affect many of us here, farm cafes, manufacturers of drinks on farms, etc. And again, it's more cost, more hassle, and is it going to put something that's going to impact our bottom line, potentially? The transient visitor levy, this has been introduced. We'll have to take money off everybody that comes to stay with us overnight. We'll have to administer that. There's challenges around, will it make us go over the VAT threshold? All that. It's more to do. It's more red tape. We're already trying to stay competitive internationally as a country for tourism, and it will put up prices. You could argue that the money will be reinvested into our local economies, but it is another thing. And then access to capital. At the moment, there's no SRDP, there's no leader, there's no capital grant scheme to help us get going. These are all things that could impact the growth of agritourism. Right, now the Spice Girls on tour, they're looking good. That wasn't my joke, that's Robert Wilson that came up with that on Twitter. But very fortunate, thanks to RAS and the support from Scottish Enterprise, that 7 of us went to the International Agritourism Conference in Vermont a couple of months ago. We were the only representatives from the UK there at all. So Scotland turned up with 7 people. We did ask men to come, but none of them were coming. Nobody applied from a male point of view. I don't know why being stuck on a bus with us for 12 days was not an attractive prospect. So we went out and we represented Scotland, and I hope I represented Scotland well. I just want to put this up here in terms of some learnings. Many other countries have specific laws and legislation around agritourism. It's a big deal in other countries. Agritourism is it's mainstream. For too long here in Scotland, it hasn't been mainstream. It doesn't, we've been a little marginal thing, farmhouse bed and breakfast seen as a small thing. But in other countries, it's big. And you'll see up here that in Vermont, they have a particular law which helps with planning for farm tourism, agritourism, and also you see these signs up everywhere about liability and farms and things. Kay and I spoke at the conference. We spoke about the Scottish Enterprise Agritourism Monitor Farms, and we shared that knowledge with people that were there. We've had a lot of interest from around the world in understanding about that programme. The thing that came out, most times you go abroad and you're coming back with all this new information of how wonderful everything is. It was great, and we did learn a lot of things in Vermont, but we went out there and we went on 2 days of we went on 3 days of farm tours with me driving a minibus, followed by 2 days which were the organised tours. And on the organised tours, we were taken to their best of agritourism. 2 of those places were in the city or the town, so they don't have a definition that includes a working farm. We didn't mind being in a cider factory at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, but it wasn't on a farm. And then, environmental health. They've got so lax environmental health that 5 of us got food poisoning. So I came home loving my environmental health officer. So we have to be, sometimes we don't realise some of the things that we've got are actually good for us. Quality assurance, we've got really good quality businesses here. And I think, we came home with a real appreciation for what we've got in Scotland. We are now involved in a new international body, so there's going to be a Scottish Agritourism feeding into an international network, and they've given me an amazing job, and I'll tell you what my job is. So my job is I've got to write the spec for what a successful country would do to win the World Agritourism Conference coming to it. And I've got to write that for 2 weeks' time. So that'll be good. It'll include a country that has blue and white in its flag and other things. So if MD wants to help me with that, then let me know. We marketed Scotland extensively, and Anne Lennox is not going to thank me for this photograph, but we took Go Rural maps out and we handed them out to everybody. This is a woman sitting in business class on the plane. This is her flight to New York. She's got a map. She was reading it whether she wanted or not. This is our delegates with everybody internationally at 2 o'clock in the morning, selling Scotland. But the important point, everybody was talking about Scotland. They all had our maps. And Anne, at this point, this man's saying, should I go to Edinburgh on my holidays? She's like, you will come to Loch Lomond and you will stay with me. You will not go to Edinburgh. You will not pass go. Italy. I've mentioned Italy. I've not got all the slides from the conference, don't worry, but I've mentioned Italy. That's their growth there. 2007 to 2019, it's gone up by 38%, €1.5 billion. And that is from farm accommodation and restaurants. Sorry, the slide is a little bit blurry. That's what we're aiming for. £1 billion, £500 million. £500 million would be great. £750 million would be amazing. That's the kind of figures, and we need to make sure that policymakers, government, economic development people that are in this room and not in this room understand the potential for rural economy from agritourism. And that's me finished, my spiel. And I'd now like to introduce Mairi Gougeon and hand you over to her.
Thank you. Oh, how to follow that, and I think all the inspirational speakers that I've been hearing about that you've heard from this morning. But I'm just absolutely delighted to be back here in Perth to address the Scottish Agritourism Conference in 2022. And I think it's also fantastic to see the amazing attendance that you've got here today as well, because I understand that around 270 tickets had been sold for the event, which is fantastic. Because it doesn't also quite seem like a year since we were last here. And I think it's fair to say that quite a lot has happened within that time. And I don't think we could have foreseen at that point just how challenging things, how much more challenging things were going to get at that point. But I think while a lot has happened within that time, I think it's also fair to say that a lot has been going on in the world of agritourism too. Agritourism presents a real opportunity to showcase agriculture in Scotland and the contribution that it can make towards meeting the really challenging climate change and biodiversity targets that we have. But it also presents a massive opportunity to showcase our incredible food and drink, our iconic landscapes, our nature, as well as to bring urban and rural communities closer together. And it's already doing that. And in particular, it gives visitors, whether they're from Scotland or from elsewhere in the world, a better appreciation of where our food comes from. It connects people to food, it connects people to our land, and it shows the ongoing need to promote local produce and reduce food miles. And not only that, but agritourism is incredibly diverse, which is important. Farm diversification is a vital tool to ensure that we have a strong and world-leading agriculture industry in Scotland. That's the case now, as well as looking to the future. It covers such a wide range of product types and experiences right across the length and breadth of Scotland, whether that's farm visits, weddings and events, from the really excellent farm to fork experiences to great opportunities to learn about the whole food chain. There really is something for everyone in agritourism. And I'd like to thank Caroline for all her work and her dedication in driving agritourism forward in Scotland, because I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that none of us would be here without Caroline's hard work and perseverance in promoting and organising agritourism in Scotland. But I'd also like to give a huge thanks to your chair, Riddle Graham, and the 15 destination leaders who've all been putting in, I know, a heck of a lot of hard work, and I bet some really long shifts this year too. The destination leaders are playing a vital role of leadership in the sector. I've met quite a lot of you so far, and I really look forward to working with you in the new Agritourism Implementation Board, which I will be co-chairing. This newly formed board will meet to progress the short, medium and long-term actions of Scotland's agritourism strategy. And our first meeting is later on this week, so we really will be hitting the ground running straight after this conference. I think it also speaks volumes of how important Scotland views agritourism when you stop to consider that the 7 delegates we sent to the World Conference that Caroline was talking about were the only ones who attended from across the UK. And who knows, perhaps in a few years' time, we may ourselves be welcoming the World Agritourism Conference here to Scotland. I think that really would be fantastic, and the impact of an event like that would, I think, really cement our ambition to be a world leader in agritourism, because I just want to be clear that that's absolutely where my ambition is and where I would like to see us. I think it's also really refreshing to see that 13 out of the 15 of our destination leaders playing a key role in leading the sector throughout Scotland are women. Agritourism is leading the way in getting more women involved with agriculture, and that can only be a good thing. Of the 270 individuals engaged in the Scottish Agritourism Business Members Group, 2/3 are women. The Growth Tracker report, which I'll discuss in more detail a bit later on, shows that there are slightly more women than men who are directors of agritourism and farm retail businesses. Agritourism and farm retail is clearly making a difference to the role that women play as business owners and decision makers. It probably wouldn't surprise anyone in this room for me to highlight that women, of course, play a major role in Scottish agriculture. However, there are still a relatively small number of female-led farming businesses, and women remain significantly underrepresented in leadership roles right across the industry. We know that women are essential in developing sustainable adaptation options in relation to climate change and the biodiversity challenges that we face as a nation, and that can be seen by the high percentage of women involved in agritourism, and I think in the attendance here today too. In 2017, we had established the Women in Agriculture Task Force, really to try and engage with the inequality issues in Scottish agriculture and develop solutions to try and break down some of those barriers that we know are faced by women. The task force identified the need for women-only agricultural training and development opportunities. It also discussed the need for rural childcare, for changes to crofting legislation, as well as recommendations in relation to health and safety. Now, following the publication of that task force final report in 2019, the Scottish Government has committed funding to deliver solutions to implement change for women in agriculture until the end of this Parliament. And as part of the Women in Agriculture programme, we're funding the Be Your Best Self personal development course for all women who are living and working in Scottish agriculture. Now, I know that many of you here today may have already benefited from this course, but if you haven't heard about it before, or you're still thinking of applying to it, I really would encourage you to go along to the Be Your Best Self stand to find out more. Now, we also know that in rural areas we face particular skills challenges. There are significant staff shortages, there are issues with retention and attraction, as well as wider demographic challenges too. We want to make sure that we have the right people with the right skills so that we can develop a sustainable agritourism sector for the future. The Skills Action Plan for Rural Scotland has driven forward a partnership approach to developing the skills and talent needed to make sure that Scotland's rural economy and communities flourish and grow. Tourism organisations have been actively involved in delivering the plan's priorities, and they'll continue to be involved in our work to make sure that future skills provision addresses the needs of people and businesses across rural Scotland. An evaluation of our Skills Action Plan for rural Scotland recently published just last month, and that provides really useful learning that's going to inform, with other relevant work, the future direction of skills coordination and delivery in rural Scotland. And as well as that, last year I also established a commission for land-based learning. Now, that commission had been tasked with undertaking a root and branch review of learning in Scotland's land-based sectors to ensure that we are providing those opportunities, the qualifications and apprenticeships to ultimately allow more people, and in particular more women, to work on the land. Now, back to agritourism in particular. One of the most positive indicators for agritourism's future health in Scotland came just this week with the publication of the Agritourism Growth Tracker, which Caroline talked about. And again, I would just want to give my huge thanks to Visit Scotland for undertaking this really excellent and valuable piece of work. It's important to remember that for a large part of the year in which we were tracking that information, many businesses were of course being impacted by COVID restrictions. Some businesses were closed for up to 5 months, so I think the results that we've seen are really encouraging. The tracker report confirms that agritourism is worth around £60 million to the Scottish economy, and this is similar to pre-pandemic figures, and I think it also goes to show just how resilient the sector is too. I think it's exciting to look to the future and think just how much agritourism will continue to bring to the Scottish economy in the coming years. The report itself shows notable post-COVID-19 turnover growth has been projected by agritourism operators. And there's also great news in there for farm retail. Revenues have been boosted by increased demand for buying local or buying direct from a farmer. And I think in these days of a cost of living crisis, of course, every penny counts, and none more so than for our agriculture industry. Non-farm retail revenues have increased from £62 million to over £110 million, which really is an amazing figure. But while it's fantastic, obviously, to see that increase in revenue, of course, it's not just about the money. Over a third of agritourism businesses are offering food and drink consumption on site. And this boom in farm retail sales is a result of growing awareness of the economical, the ethical and environmental benefits of buying directly from farmers. And anything that can help us meet our net zero as well as our Good Food Nation ambitions has to be a good thing. We want to see Scotland as a nation where people know about, they appreciate and they benefit from the food that we produce, that we eat, cook, serve and that we buy each day. And of course, this it's not just about the food and drink element. Other potential growth areas include the farm experiences and farm tours, accommodation, as well as event spaces too. Now, the Agritourism Monitor Farm programme that we previously ran was a really fantastic initiative to share that expertise, that learning and experience. It had launched in 2019 with 2 farming enterprises selected to take part. And following the success of the Agritourism Monitor Farm programme, it gives me a tremendous pleasure to announce today that the Scottish Government will be providing £443,000 of support to Scottish enterprise to establish a new Agritourism Monitor Farm programme over the 2023-24 and 24-25 period. This will involve 4 new agritourism monitor farms distributed across Scotland, involving a wider community of at least 8 rural businesses around each of the farms and participation by a minimum of 400 individual rural businesses in meetings and discussions. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this is going to build on the success that we've seen from the previous programme, and the participants, Stuart and Joe McNichol of Castleton Events and Drift at North Berwick, and the Lennox family who are on the Luss estate too. And I'm sure that the previous and new Agritourism Monitor Farm programmes will provide that really invaluable learning and experience. And I hope that others, of course, will follow suit, and that from that we will then see many more agritourism businesses in the future. And details of the outcome of the Agritourism Monitor Farm recruitment exercise will be made known in due course. In addition to the £10,000 from the Scottish Rural Network to enable this event, I'm also delighted to be able to announce £35,000 worth of funding to support the implementation of the Scottish Agritourism strategy. This funding is being provided to Scottish Agritourism directly to provide that leadership in a number of areas, including helping with the organisation and coordination of the implementation board that I mentioned earlier. And I know that Caroline can speak much more about how the funding will deliver the strategy in practice. The future of agritourism in Scotland, I believe, is a very bright one. A strong Scottish agritourism offering provides a whole wide range of benefits to support our rural areas as well as our communities in some of the most remote parts of Scotland too. It will help sustain our valuable family farms with self-generation of farm income, as well as keeping multiple generations of farming families on farm in employment. It provides access for overseas visitors into our really incredible and diverse rural areas. It connects people to food, to land and to nature. But agritourism is also healthy for our planet too. It creates sustainable tourism. It links up with other forms of tourism, such as cultural, whether that's cycling, hiking, sailing and outdoor activities as well. And I think all of this is evidence with how far we've come in the 12 months since the strategy was launched. When you look back on that, since then, we've seen the implementation board launched, many Scottish Agritourism members winning at local Thistle Awards and going on to the Nationals, a great Scottish presence at the World Agritourism Conference, and the great news to look forward to with the establishment of a new Monitor Farm programme. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what 2023 will bring for Scottish agritourism. Thank you very much.
Do you mind? I use mic up. You can come sit down. Oh, sorry. Sorry, slight confusion over microphones. Cabinet Secretary, thank you very much for your presentation, and also thank you to yourself and the Scottish Government for your funding commitments to agritourism, which is really welcome by everyone in this room. I'd like to now take questions, please. If you could just say your name and where you're from, your farm business, agritourism business, please. I'd like to take as many questions as I can in the next 15 to 20 minutes. I'll start off down the front here. If you just wait for the microphone.
Hi, I'm Chris Duncan from Millar Architects. The issue that we have in our practice, we're a rural-focused architectural practice. And the challenge that we find most of our clients and the delegates here today are facing over and above just finding funding is the planning system. Okay. And when we were here last year, I asked you what the government were doing to try and improve the planning system and to make it more accessible and easier to get planning for all the great projects which everyone in this room is trying to get over to raise the economy of Scotland and to make it a great place. What's happened in the last 12 months that is aiming to improve the planning system? What I'm finding through our practice is that planning guidance is actually changing to make it harder to get planning in rural areas rather than the other way around.
Oh, well, obviously it's really, I think, disappointing to hear that, and I think especially in the year since you posed that question to me, and to hear that things have gotten worse rather than better, because I think if anything we were aiming, and I probably said at that time, for things to be improved rather than going the opposite way. And I'd be interested in if anybody wants to feed back to me afterwards about, I think, particular challenges that you're facing. I know, Caroline, you touched on that in your presentation as well, and I think just the differences between different local authorities in relation to that too. We've obviously had the National Planning Framework 4 published, as that was just recently within the course of the past few weeks, which I would have hoped is, again, we want to try and make things better and not stymie development in rural areas. And I think especially from my perspective, when we've got the challenges about depopulation in rural areas, when we need to be building more homes, for example, and you want to enable that development because we obviously want our rural, remote and island areas to thrive. So I think if there are particular experiences that you're having, to follow up with me after and to let me know, and I of course can raise that with my planning colleagues, because I think we want to improve this system ultimately. We don't want it to be going back the way, and I think if that's not the experience and you are finding it more challenging, then that's something I need to know about.
You only get a minute and then they put the microphone on.
Yeah, I think it's clearly to do with the local authorities themselves. Often the guidance is there, but it's a matter of interpretation, and it's the interpretation by individual planning officers that seems to be the problem. Someone mentioned earlier on that, I think it was maybe a tongue-in-cheek comment that it depends which planning officer you get. That is very much our experience, and that shouldn't be the case.
Cabinet Secretary, I understand that MPF4 is now at the committee stage. We did put a response into the consultation, but nothing that we've put in from the agritourism sector has been kind of acknowledged in what has come out. Is there anything more we can do from the agritourism sector? Can we give evidence to committee, for example? Because I've got concerns that actually we're going backwards in terms of planning, in terms of to help us.
I think probably, well, what we could do is arrange even a meeting with the planning minister, I think, to discuss the specific concerns. If you find that helpful, and we can take that forward.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Can I just ask somebody who wants to ask a question on Slido? Then I'll manage to get them up here as well. But thanks, Chris, for your question. Can I have another question, please? Right at the back there. Sorry, right up the back in the posh seats up at the back.
Hello, Ruth Tewer, Create Trees Manor. You can tell by my accent I'm not from Scotland. I'm from just over the border. I'm here on a, you might call it, fact-finding mission. I've been following Scottish agritourism for quite a while, and we have an agritourism business in England. We call that on our website, but I don't think anybody in England knows what that means. My question really is to Caroline that it's such an exciting and obvious way forward for agritourism and agriculture and diversification. I don't like the word diversification. It's what I call making the most of your assets. Is something like this going to be possibly rolled out towards England in the future?
Okay, so interestingly, in our Scottish agricultural strategy for Scotland, there is a specific action to work with others in the rest of the UK to form a better network in the UK, because it would make our case much stronger to talk to the UK government about things that affect agritourism at that UK level. So there is a specific action. So there's two things. One is there's an action to have a meeting with other farming organisations, and we have good connections in there, but there is an action to have that network. I also, when I was down at the Nuffield conference in Cardiff, spoke to many leaders in agritourism in England, Wales and Northern Ireland that were there, and they do want to get something going. I think we could support kind of trying to help get that network going, but ultimately, the leaders in these other countries need to come forward. But certainly, I think it would strengthen Scotland's case at a UK level to help with things. For example, in other countries, agritourism has a 5% VAT rate. We're not going to get that by going down to the UK government and saying Scotland would like this, please. So it has to be a UK thing. So thank you for coming from Cumbria, and I hope you feel very welcome. And it'd be great to have more an organisation south of the border as well. Can I have another question, please? Come on, we've got Neil, you'll give us a good question.
It's Neil Bowser from Argity Red Kites at Doon. Cabinet Secretary, some years ago, the Scottish Government brought out very strenuous legislation for let properties, which makes it impossible, or virtually impossible, to get houses back that are perhaps not being well run by tenants. So it now makes it totally undesirable to let out properties. Now, I think the Scottish Government feels that there is not enough accommodation in Scotland for the people who need it. We've now got this short-term let licensing system. Many people have put spare accommodation into short-term lets. And now it feels like the Indians are circling the wagon. And where do we go from here? It seems a pernicious form of legislation, and it feels as if the Scottish Government is actually stifling enterprise in the countryside.
No, thanks for that, and I absolutely appreciate the concern and the points that you've raised there. I think, first of all, it's really important that I think we're due to be reviewing this through the course of next year, and I think it's important that we take stock of the legislation that's been introduced to see how it has been operating. As Caroline, you were talking about as well, I think the differences that you're seeing between local authorities. But also at the same time, I think from a government perspective, you need to allow local authorities the discretion to determine, because it's not something we can take a blanket national approach to. Because I think without a doubt, one of the biggest or perhaps the biggest issue that I get when I visit some of our rural areas and island communities is about housing. There are job opportunities there for people, but there isn't the levels of housing or affordable housing. With one island I visited where 50% of the properties there were second or holiday homes. There are particular pockets where that's more of an issue compared to other areas. So I think the mechanism and the way that was designed was really essentially to allow for that flexibility in the approach. But again, I think that's where it's important to hear these different examples, how people are experiencing that across the country, to see if that is something that needs to be addressed. But again, I think it is vital that we take stock of the legislation that's been introduced and see the impact that it's been having.
Cabinet Secretary, I think certainly one of the challenges, or there's a few challenges with this legislation, but one of them certainly that, for all of us in here are running professional, proper tourism businesses. We're already adhering to all the statutory things that we have to adhere to. We're not running second homes. It's not the Second Home Conference, it's the Agritourism Conference, and we have, well-run professional accommodation that's not accommodation that's taken people's rural homes away. So I think that's certainly one of the things. But the other thing is all these raft of things that are coming in now, they're on the back of 2 years of COVID. They all seem to be coming in together, and it feels like we've come out of COVID and we're then faced by an economic downturn, the deposit return scheme, short-term lets, transient. It feels like we're walking through porridge, and we're trying to grow our sector. So I think that is the big challenge.
No, absolutely. And I think it's something we need to consider across government too. I mean, because looking at the list of the issues that you'd highlighted there was I'm responsible for agritourism, and it's making sure that we're connecting across government and trying to join those dots, because I appreciate it. It's a sector that I feel really positive about, that I really want to see grow. But again, I recognise the challenges that you've got, and I certainly hope you wouldn't take from my initial response that I'm by any means blaming anybody that has a short-term let accommodation, because I think it's of course vital that we have that. For us, it's about how do we strike that balance, and I think that's where we need to review what we're doing, because is it skewed? Are we getting it right? We need to check that, and again, making sure that we are aligning. And I think that there are some acute problems that we need to challenge. I think that's why the short-term lets licensing has come forward. But I've also heard, I mean, you mentioned the deposit return scheme in the list there as well. I know that that's a particular concern that I hear loudly from the food and drink sector as well. And it's not so much even about the principles behind deposit return, which I know are broadly welcomed. I don't think there's anything really to disagree with there. But again, it's the timing and how we do that. So again, for a lot of these areas, I want to make sure I feed that back to colleagues so that we can at least look at that, make sure that we're fully aware of the impact of these decisions that we're taking.
I think it's unintended consequences as well, because we're all running businesses, and the civil servants are doing their job. They don't necessarily know how it feels to run a business, and sometimes it just feels like hard slog. Can we take another question, please? Sorry, I can't quite see who that is. Alison, and then, behind. Take first row first, and then the row behind.
Hi there, it's Alison Younger here from Old Lecky Farm. I just really wanted to say, really welcome the funding announcement today for the monitor farms. Those of us that were involved with the last couple got a huge amount out of them, and it's brilliant to think that we've got a wee bit of resource coming into Scottish Agritourism to continue to support that work as we go forward. So thank you very much for that. I was thinking one of the big things that came up in the previous Monitor Farms, and I think where people are thinking, is this an opportunity for me to come forward and throw my hat in the ring for that? Obviously, borrowing conditions are not what they were. We know people have plans. There's a load of ambitions in this room, and I think that kind of hopefully confidence to see there's an opportunity to be the masters of our own destiny. Would you anticipate there being some element of capital funding available in future years that can help reduce that risk a little bit for folks if they're thinking about planning that investment programme, obviously with the end of Leader and then everything kind of in a flux? Is that something you would hope we can see in the next sort of 5 years?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that that's where the feedback, as Caroline has talked about as well, on the agritourism bill is really important about how we use future funding. It's about where agritourism fits into that picture as well, because, yeah, I'm aware through the Leader programme that various businesses were able to take part in that. And obviously, since we've left the EU, we've had to develop our own programmes, trying to take the learning from that and adapt it. But I do understand that need for capital to get some businesses going and to get some enterprise going. And that is one of the biggest areas of concern for me, because, you know, we are seeing our budgets reduce all the time, and I think particularly in relation to capital. And I think whereas we had the certainty before as members of the EU that you would have that 7 years, you knew what was coming and you knew what your allocations would be. Right now it's on an annual basis. I know that's really frustrating for businesses, first of all, to go through a process of applying for funding, then needing to spend it by the end of the financial year. So these are all problems that we're trying to make our way through. And yeah, I have no certainty of budget beyond the next couple of years either. So it's really hard for me to say at this moment in time as to what will be there. But just to say that I absolutely recognise the point that you've raised, and hopefully if we have that budget available, I think that's something I would look to do, or to see where through agritourism you fit into that scheme of things. But again, as we're developing that future framework for support, I think it's really important that people take part in that, so we can help shape a future system that's going to work and is going to be right.
Yeah, I think capital grants are so important, and also given that farmers, you know, are facing an uncertainty with what's changing in CAP and economic conditions as well. I think those one-off capital payments to allow somebody to get that starting leg into agritourism, if that's what they want to go into, makes such a difference. We certainly wouldn't have managed to get going in our business without an SRDP grant. The bank just wouldn't have lent to us. So they are vitally important. Can I take the lady that's behind you? Sorry, it's my eyesight and getting darker.
Hi, it's Flora Corbett from...
Hello, Flora. Hello. I can see you now.
Yes. I am going to ask the question with my chair of the Isle of Mull slaughterhouse hat on today. There's been lots of talk already today about a good food nation, local food production, farm to fork, etc. But what is being done to protect and support the small local abattoirs and butchers who provide farmers with a slaughter and butchery service, but due to red tape and huge costs are closing at a rapid rate?
Yeah, that is a huge concern. I was at the Smallholders Festival in Forfar a few weeks ago, and without a doubt, I think every single person I spoke to, it was processing capacity that was raised with me by everyone, and it is a big issue. We did undertake a study a few years ago, but that was in relation to mobile slaughterhouses and the provision for that. And I think the outcome of that report had pretty much said that, well, of course, we'd be open to considering any sort of application, but I mean, obviously the facts of a mobile abattoir is that you'd be dependent, you'd have to have the same regulation as what you would with a stationary one. And we haven't seen any proposals come forward for that, because there are, if any proposals did come forward, there are various different schemes that we could potentially use to help get something like that off the ground. But I know that my officials are doing a piece of work looking at processing at the moment with SAOS in recognition, because I know that particularly when the the facilities, Fife Downfield closed, that was a big blow for smaller producers as well. So I understand how critical this issue is. I just want to assure you that work is ongoing in relation to that to see what more we can do, because I do think we want to see a strong food sector in Scotland. You talked about the Good Food Nation Bill. We have a local food strategy as well. The only way that we can achieve all our ambitions within that is if we have the processing capacity, we shorten our supply chains, and we look to do what we can to support that network.
Okay.
But if you want to follow up with me after, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about that.
We've got time for one very quick last question. Anyone over there, please?
Thanks, Caroline. David Whiteford, Castle Craig Farms. Just a supplementary to Neil's one, really, and without wanting to be part of the Caroline Appreciation Society.
Oh, you can be.
There's already too many in the room, I think. But you know, the self-catering licensing system is you know, it's potentially a sledgehammer to crack an egg, and really concerning. You know, it came out really of central Edinburgh, where of course Airbnb was taking over both the new town and the old town. And as you say, yeah, there are some issues in islands. As a Highlander, I see the need for, and as chair of Highland Coast Hotels, the need for more social housing, for more affordable housing. And we need to stop all that moving to the central belt, because we have lots of little pockets of demand for local housing. But somebody in the central belt says, well, there's 200, let's get a developer, we'll do those. And the Highlands loses out. And the other point that needs made here is that some of the councils who feel underfunded are using this tax as a profit centre. So why not have a centralised system so it's fair for everybody? So that, as Caroline says, someone's 500, someone's 1,500. It's so inconsistent. So could we have a centralised system and not through the local authorities, who, as I say, have the potential to use it as a profit centre? Thank you.
I understand your concerns with that and the flexibility, and that's where you see that variation. But I suppose, you know, you don't want to be, for us, I don't want to be bypassing local democracy either. And it's about, again, it's all about how you strike that balance, and about each area essentially trying to do what's right for their own programme, for their own area, rather than central government dictating that this is what everybody has to do when not everybody has similar problems or similar issues. But again, I think all of this feeding back into any review and monitoring that we do is going to be really important, so that we can get a handle on all of those issues. You're absolutely right about plans for building affordable housing. I take part in the Convention of South of Scotland, Convention of the Highlands and Islands, where a provision of housing is right up that agenda as well. We're developing an action plan for remote, rural and island housing as well, backed with funding, because we know there are challenges there that we need to address, because we can't be in a situation where there are so many opportunities in different parts of Scotland, but we're not enabling that to happen, and we're not enabling our economy to grow, because there's nowhere for people to live. I just don't think that's sustainable, and especially when we are seeing depopulation from some areas. So yeah, we are absolutely committed to trying addressing that and ensuring that we are developing and building those houses where they're needed in rural Scotland.
Okay, thank you to everyone for the questions. I'd like you to join with me and just thank the Cabinet Secretary for joining us this afternoon.